friends, it's Sarah, and happy Pride Month! So last year in June, I made a video with all of my favorite queer books, and I thought this year I would make a video with just more recommendations of books that are by LGBTQ+ authors and feature queer characters. And as I was making my list, it got really long, and I noticed that there was a common theme through some of the books that were in there, so I thought I would split this into two different videos. And so this video is going to be a collection of young adult contemporary novels that all feature queer, messy teens. So these are all young adult contemporary novels where the main characters are kind of coming of age, struggling with their identities a lot of the times, kind of trying to figure out how to juggle friends and like romance and just figuring out life. And along the way, they make some horrendous decisions. These are the kind of books where you're reading them and you can see where this is going and you're like, please don't do what I think you're about to do. And then the character does what you think they're about to do and you go, no, please. But by the end, they grow up, they realize the mistakes they've made, they mend bridges, and you end up feeling pretty hopeful for them, for the most part. Some, not always, but for the most part, by the end, you're like, thank God, you're okay, you're gonna be fine. And I thought I would talk about these books in order from least messy to the most messy in terms of the main characters. So one of the reasons why I find this category of messy teens so interesting is that before there was a lot of queer or LGBTQ+ representation in media and in books, the small amount of representation that did exist was held to a super high standard and was expected to be not quite perfect, but like the characters were expected to be, very moral and like make the right decisions and basically be beyond reproach because they wanted to be like, see, look, gay people are good too. Please let us exist in media. And so now, with there being a lot more content that does represent the LGBTQ+ community, there is a lot more room for different kinds of representation and a better exploration of like queer people as, human beings allowed to make mistakes, not just perfect angels who have not done a single thing wrong ever. So being able to see these teens make mistakes and act human and be just as silly and messy as their straight counterparts is just a really cool milestone, I guess. But within the representation of queer people, it's just really nice to be able to like, hey, you can make mistakes. It's okay. You're still deserving of love and respect and all that, the same way that straight people are, even though you mess up, because, we're all human. Anyways, get down off my soapbox and let's just talk about these books. So first up on the list, so the least messy of the messy teens is Chloe Green from I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. They're all YA contemporary. I'm just gonna straight up, they're all YA contemporary novels, so I don't have to say that every time. But this follows Chloe Green, who had just kissed the town's popular girl, Shara Wheeler, and then Shara disappears. And so Chloe teams up with Shara's boyfriend and Shara's neighbor, who had all kissed her before her disappearance as they try and track down Shara. And Shara has actually left them notes to be like, hey, come find me. So the main character in this, Chloe, is kind of prickly. She's a little bit grouchy, kind of grumpy, closed off to other people, but a sweetheart inside. So in this book, which is kind of like a queer Paper Towns, it's what the main character Paper Towns wishes was happening to him. But Chloe does kind of sacrifice some of her friendships in her pursuit of Shara, which is what kind of makes this a messy teen book. Chloe's a little prickly, she makes some bad choices, but ultimately is able to reconcile with her friends and, kiss the girl again. So that's great. But she doesn't make any, hugely horrifying mistakes. just a couple little missteps. So that's why she's on the least messy end of the scale. And this was a 4-star read for me. The second book, moving up a step on the messy scale, is Loveless by Alice Oseman, which was a 5-star read for me. And this follows Georgia, who is asexual and aromantic, as she goes into her first year of university, and she is a diehard romantic but hasn't been able to ever be in a relationship with anyone. And as she starts her first year of university, she's starting to discover that she's like ace and arrow. She's navigating this experience of like learning her identity while also trying to make friends and enjoy her university life. And of course, she's a little messy teen. She makes a lot of mistakes and hurts a lot of her friends unintentionally. What I really loved about this book is it really emphasizes the importance of friendship and how it is just as important, if not more important, than any romantic relationship you might have. So the real love letter in this book is between Georgia and her friends, which is very sweet. But she does definitely make some bad decisions and hurt the people that she loves the most. Up next is Some Girls Do by Jennifer Dugan, and this was a 4-star read for me. The 2 books that I've read by this author have both featured messy teens, and Jennifer does a great job at writing teens where you're just like, oh God, please don't. It's like a car accident that you can't look away from, especially in Verona comics. But the one I want to talk about is Some Girls Do, and it follows a gay track star who has just had to move from her Catholic school where she was kicked out for being queer, and the bisexual, bratty pageant queen / mechanic. They have an enemies to lovers relationship where there's a lot of time spent on the enemies part of it. So there's a lot of tension between the two of them, and they butt heads, and there's just some horrendous miscommunications between these two characters, including one of them getting hit by the other's car, which is real messy, like big oof. But ultimately they are able to put aside their differences and fall for each other. But oh man, they're just ready to fight each other for a lot of this novel. So that is why they are #messy teens. Okay, so now we're about the halfway mark. We're in the middle of like the messy spectrum. And we have Ophelia After All by Racquel Marie, which was a 4.5-star read for me. So this follows Ophelia, who has always been like kind of boy crazy, and that's what she's known as in her friend group and like by her family. But she starts to fall for a girl and is kind of grappling with this identity of being boy crazy that has been kind of thrust upon her by her loved ones, and her realization that she's not straight and that she's actually falling for a girl. And she doesn't really want to go against the expectations that all of her family and friends have of her, but she's also feeling really constrained by this idea that she's always falling in love with boys. So she's dealing with all that pressure herself, as well as trying to pursue this girl that she's interested in. And for Ophelia, her messiness comes in her lack of communication with her friends and what she's going through, and so it builds as a sort of resentment in her against her friends and family, but then also in her pursuit of this other girl who she's fallen for, but who might not feel exactly the same way about her. So there's a lot of heartbreak and fights in this book, and I just felt so bad for Ophelia. She was going through so much, but she was not handling it well, and she was not talking to anyone about all of the problems she was having. So it puts her in the middle of messy teens. Also, another middle of the messy teen spectrum is Rise to the Sun by Leah Johnson. This one I gave 4 stars as well. This takes place during a summer music festival and follows Olivia, who is constantly falling in love with people and has decided to like take a break from dating, and she and her best friend are going to have a great like friend weekend together. And it also follows Tori, who has just recently lost her father and so is trying to follow in his career footsteps, because this music festival is where he got his start as a musician, and that's what she wants to do as well. So she's going there to feel closer to her father and hopefully jumpstart her career as a musician. And these two meet and end up doing a like scavenger hunt during this music festival together and also falling for each other. The messiness here is mostly on Olivia because she's like, you know what, BFF? It's gonna be girls' weekend, we're gonna have fun, it's just the two of us, I'm not gonna go off with some stranger that I just met. And then of course she meets a stranger and goes off with her and breaks her promise to her friend, and so there's a lot of conflict there between Olivia and her friend and trying to patch up that relationship while also pursue a romantic relationship. And it's not great. I felt really bad for her friend because she's like, no, I promise, you know, I just gotta help her with one thing and then like it'll just be the two of us. And then of course the one thing turns into like another thing and then something else, and I wanted to scratch my skin off a little bit. I was like so frustrated with her. It had great summer vibes though. Like it was just really made me want to go listen to music out in the park somewhere. So now we're kind of getting into the more like you've done something almost or actually illegal part of the messy teen spectrum. And first up on that is Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. This follows Felix, who is a trans boy and just wants to be in love and to be loved by someone, when an anonymous student dead names him and posts pictures of him pre-transition in the school, which is incredibly traumatizing. But Felix thinks he knows who it is, and so he sets up a sort of catfish situation in order to get revenge on the person who had done this to him. And obviously that's like super messy, but he also kind of ends up in like a love triangle thing and hurts a lot of people. And yet this book is cute. Tell me how this book is still adorable and so sweet when he's doing all this weird stuff. But he ends up hurting like his best friend. He falls for someone. It kind of breaks their heart as well. It's a lot. The catfish is definitely like the most illegal thing, but I mean the way he hurts his friend I think should be illegal too. His friend is so cute. It's still very sweet, and he does manage to mend all his bridges, but those revenge plots, man, it's not great. Don't do that. It never ends well. Up next is No Filter and Other Lies by Crystal Maldonado. And this one follows Kat Sanchez as she, once again, catfishes someone. She is a photographer, but she uses photos of a client to start an Instagram profile under the name Max Monroe, where she starts texting with this other girl and they start to fall for each other. But obviously, she's not being honest about who she is. And then one of her posts goes viral and the facade starts to crumble around her. So, obviously the catfishing in here is the biggest messy part. But I think what makes it messier than Felix Ever After is that it goes on for so long. She meets this girl in person and she's pretending to be like two people at once. So it's just, this book. I really like Crystal Maldonado's first book, Fat Chance Charlie Vega. I love that book. And so I was like, I'm gonna read this one too. And as I was reading it, I had so much secondhand embarrassment and like cringe that I was like, I don't know if I can keep reading. And I thought this was gonna be like maybe a 2 or 3 star read for me. But by the end, I don't know how she did it. I don't know how Crystal did it, but she managed to like wrap it up in such a way that I was like happy and like almost crying for Kat in this. And I just think this was such an excellent turnaround and character growth and development from this like kind of illegal catfishing situation all the way to like really feeling for Kat and wanting her to be okay. So excellent character arc, but like, oh my god, so stressful. Okay, moving on. Next up is Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero-O'Connell. This was actually given to me by my friend Emma and is a graphic novel, which is very fun. But this follows an on-again, off-again relationship between Freddie and Laura Dean. And obviously, as the title suggests, Laura Dean keeps breaking up with her. And poor Freddie is being like strung along this whole time. Every time she gets broken up with, she's like, no, she'll come back to me. And she lets Laura Dean get away with some like really awful behavior, like cheating and stuff, because she's just so in her thrall. But this book is all about like how to let go of toxic relationships and kind of mend things with your friends after you've been so like sucked into this really not great relationship. So, I mean, the messy one is definitely Laura Dean for leading on Freddie all the time, but Freddie's also not great to her friends and isn't there for them when they need her support because she's so wrapped up in Laura Dean and whether or not they'll get back together. So it just breaks my heart watching her friends be in such like a tough place and then Freddie not being there for them when they need her. So the last book I have for this video is May the Best Man Win by Z.R. Ellor. And this book, I think, is probably pretty controversial. Maybe that's not the right word. But this is a dual perspective book, and it follows Jeremy, who is a trans boy who recently came out, and his ex, Lucas, as they compete for Homecoming King. Now, Jeremy is not a likable character. Like, let's just put that out there. He is really hard to root for, and I understand where he's coming from. As like a newly out trans guy, he is trying to figure out his place in kind of like the gender norms where he wants to assert his masculinity and be perceived as a guy without really embodying that toxic masculinity. But he has so much rage in him that he just makes so many horrifying decisions and crosses the line so many times into like really messed up behavior. So the cover of this looks like it's like kind of a like cute coming of age romance. It's not. There is romance in it, but I cannot explain how much Jeremy is an unlikable character. He makes really bad decisions. Lucas also makes some pretty rough decisions, but Jeremy is definitely like the instigator in most cases. There's also a little bit of autistic representation in this. Lucas is said to be autistic. I can't comment on how good the representation actually is, but it did not feel great. For the representation, it was mostly Lucas being like, oh, I have a hard time reading people, but not really showing that. Like, there weren't many times where he kind of like miscommunicated with people because he was unable to read them, or any other representations of autistic experience. So I can't say whether or not it's good, but it felt a little lackluster. Like, it seemed to be just a thing that was kind of mentioned but never shown in his character. So I don't know. This one is definitely at the messy end because I had a hard time rooting for these characters. It was a little bit of a train wreck to watch. It was like a car accident in slow motion. And I think it has some really important things to say about gender roles and about the expectations of performing masculinity. And it was really interesting to watch Lucas struggle with his own sexuality because he had dated Jeremy prior to Jeremy's transition. And so him trying to kind of reconcile Jeremy pre and post transition and still having feelings for him, but previously having thought he was straight and now being like, well, I like him and he's a guy, so I guess I'm not straight, was a really interesting conflict to read about. And I really did like the discussions around masculinity and the different forms it can take. But, oh my God, Jeremy. That boy needs counseling. It was really rough. But that's why they're on the messiest end of the spectrum. It was oof. Oof. So, be warned if you do want to read this book. If you don't like unlikable characters, probably don't read it. It won't be for you. But if you do like unlikable characters, you should really check it out. They are a struggle to root for at times. But those are all of my recommendations for books with messy teens in them. We've got a selection from like just making a couple bad decisions all the way up to, oh my God, what the heck are you doing? I can barely read this. So hopefully there's something in there that you're interested in. Let me know if you've read these and if you're a fan of this messy teen genre, because I didn't think I would be, but then I read like 10 books that have this trope in it. So I guess maybe I am after all. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you guys have a happy Pride Month, and I'll see you next time. And the video that you're watching right now has a truck in it. Who is doing this driving? Leave me alone. Everyone who owns a truck should just be forced to drive a smart car for the rest of their lives. And